Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Joel Moran Show. Today I'm joined by Mr. John Tortorelli, and we're going to talk about some NBA trade stuff because yesterday we got a report that Pascal Siakam might be heading to the Pacers. The Pacers and the Raptors are deep in talks. We've also heard some rumors about DeJounte Murray and his potential landing spot. It's looking like the Lakers. We're not sure just yet. And then we're going to get into some NFL stuff. How you doing today, John?
I'm doing great. Lots to talk about. Lots going on, not just the NBA, but the NFL. So it's a good time.
I haven't talked to you since all the NFL games happened. Is there any takeaway that you have from Wild Card Weekend that you think is the biggest takeaway from the weekend?
Jordan Love has been the best quarterback in football since November. That's my
I like
number
that
one take.
takeaway.
And we saw at the end of the regular season, we saw some great quarterback performances, but I felt among them, Love in that performance versus the Cowboys was truly masterful in his first ever playoff game, dicing up Dan Quinn like that. And it gives me a lot of appreciation because people wrote him off before he even got a starting opportunity, right? So many quarterbacks like Tua, we wait and see for 2 years, then we make a judgment. But with how much hate he got, the way he's responded has been really awesome. It's why I'm kind of rooting for the Packers right now. And I guess people are going to be interested in what I think. As a Steeler fan, it feels like we're very rudderless, and losing to the Bills was not unexpected. We were heavy underdogs for a reason, but Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes is going to be a special game. And yeah, Pittsburgh was kind of first round fodder, unfortunately.
Did you know that Jordan Love is younger than Kenny Pickett?
I'm not surprised. Pickett's turned 26 in June.
I found that out yesterday, and I said, Steelers got to move on. It's about time. You can't keep waiting. It's an excellent point that you made about, there are some quarterbacks that we wait around for and we're patient for, and it feels like Jordan Love never got that leeway. Had he not had a successful season this year, I would have been front and center in trying to put things into perspective because he is essentially a rookie. It's his first year starting, but nobody gave him an opportunity. Everybody wrote him off as a bust. I was going through some old tweets of mine, and in 2022, I put up a poll. What is Jordan Love likely going to be? Fill in the blank. Franchise quarterback, above average starter, or bust. The second most percent of votes voted for bust. The most percentage of votes were average starter. So that was the perception of Jordan Love. And because he sat behind a Hall of Fame quarterback, I mean, people act like he sat behind Jimmy Garoppolo like Trey Lance did. I mean, he sat behind Aaron Rodgers. They just thought that he was a bust, and a lot of the frustration of not drafting a receiver for Aaron was then put on him. And now in his first year as a starter, there was no patience. He had to show that he was the guy right away. And if he didn't, there was going to be a lot of conversations about him. And I can appreciate your fandom for Jordan Love because you and I were on the mark about him. Jordan Love, not too long ago, I remember we did a Would You Rather. This was like a year and a half ago. And Tua was one of those names that came up. And we both said, I mean, we're going to take Jordan Love. And that was before ever seeing him have a full year as a starter. And I still remember Dell's reaction. He reacted like we just murdered somebody. He couldn't believe it.
That was before Tua broke out too. And at that point in time, what I said is Jordan Love has too many tools to not succeed in the NFL. And every quarterback is different. Some need to sit. Jordan Love sitting for 3 years was the best thing that could have possibly happened. And it's like the tools are only part of the equation because the pocket presence, the confidence, the ability to play through pressure is really rare. And that's something you either have or don't have. With Jalen Hurts, I feel like he doesn't quite have that, at least not on an elite level. With Love, that is the intangible tool which kind of drives his performance. And I mean, we may see it again here against San Francisco. I felt like it was almost like people didn't want to look at all the positives. We watched him throw 3 touchdowns in his first 2 starts this year. Then he led a 17-point comeback. The moment he had one bad game in his 5th ever NFL start, people said, there you go. He can't complete 60% of his passes. As his receivers have caught more of the contested balls and Aaron Jones has come back, there's been way less pressure on his plate because throughout the first 10 to 11 weeks of the year, it was just Jordan Love has to win us and will us to victories. Now they have the balance to beat teams in more than one way.
The conversation in the first 2 weeks was, is what Love is doing sustainable? But the question that nobody really was asking was, Well, how much can he improve on this? He already is showing us what he can do. Yes, he's not completing passes at a high level, but is that fixable? Have we seen it fixed before in other quarterbacks? The answer is yes. And I think the pocket presence is an underrated part of his game as well. He has one of the lowest sack rates. He has one of the lowest turnover worthy play percentages. People are right now catching a fit because I'm taking Jordan Love over CJ Stroud. I think he's better than CJ Stroud.
He was better this weekend.
And people's argument is often CJ's a rookie doing this, but that's narrative based. That's not evaluating who's a better player. Just because CJ's a rookie and Jordan Love is in year 4, it does not make what Love is doing any less impressive. It doesn't matter if CJ's in year 1. Ultimately, it's about who's a better quarterback. And this year, Jordan Love has made more big time throws. He's had the same amount of turnover worthy plays as CJ, but at a lower percentage. He has a higher percentage of big time throws as well. And he takes less sacks than CJ. And I think both are getting scheme help. I mean, you can argue that Jordan Love is kind of playing with less talent.
Yeah.
But even then, they're both getting scheme help, and Bobby Slowick has made it really easy on CJ. And that's no disrespect to CJ, but when you look at what happened in the playoffs versus the Browns, like, it is the number one defense. Sure, you're going to use that narrative, but the 3 touchdown passes that CJ threw, I mean, what were the degree of difficulty on those? When you're just measuring the degree of difficulty that Love and CJ had in their respective games and the throws they made, I think it was quite clear that Love was the better player.
Yeah, you're right. And not to make this a CJ thing, CJ and Jordan and me are stamped top 10 quarterbacks right now, with Brady retiring, Rodgers being hurt. And I always felt like Jalen Hurts was a little bit below Kyler. That was one of my hot takes. I think both those guys have surpassed Murray this year. But you are right. Jordan Love threw a 5-yard out route, and Reverend Jordan took it 75 yards. He threw a screen to Nico Collins. Both these quarterbacks are great, but I felt in wildcard weekend, Jordan Love was the best of all of them. And I don't know if you want to make this Texans point, but Stroud could have played way better this last weekend. He had the hospital pass to Nico that could have been an interception in double coverage. He had the missed ball, which was a wide open Nico Collins. Bobby Slowick has done such a great job, but after losing Tank Dell, I think most of us expect the Texans season to kind of be down in the water. We didn't really expect their offense to really explode the way it has, but Devin Singletary, when they finally got him going in that game for Cincinnati, he has showcased the explosiveness. When we talk about all those other weapons, Nico Collins, it's funny because coming into this year, no one really knew what he was. A lot of people like me thought maybe they're going to get T. Higgins. He's been T. Higgins with more explosiveness to me, and he's making way less money. You didn't have to trade a first-round pick to get him. So the tight end play with Dalton Schultz, and then the defense. I mean, Stroud is probably like the 4th or 3rd reason why they won that game, and that is only a tip of the cap for the Texans, how great of a team they've built. That's why I think they've got a pretty good chance here to actually beat the Ravens in the divisional round.
And the Ravens have the most pressure. They definitely got the most pressure because we've seen them have great regular seasons before, and then in the playoffs, they come up short. When I look at the 2020 NFL quarterback draft class, I think Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, and Jordan Love are in a tier of their own. I think those are the 3, without a doubt, stamped superstar elite tier quarterbacks, and they will go down as such. This year, we saw a major regression from Jalen Hurts. I think the offense didn't put him in the right position to succeed. They didn't have answers against the blitz. But last year, when he was with Steichen, who is one of the better play callers, Jalen Hurts struggled against the blitz. He struggled against zone coverages. So even though this year the results were far worse, last year they weren't that good either. And when you look at Jalen Hurts' pocket presence and how he tends to bail out of pockets, or sometimes even in clean pockets, he tends to kind of lose his footwork and mechanics. I just think Jordan Love is a more talented thrower of the football, and he's just more skilled at throwing the football as well. And then Tua, I mean, he's the worst of all of them. I think Tua is a clear liability to the Dolphins offense. And if you have to have questions about your quarterback in certain weather, as soon as you see the forecast, you're saying, that puts us at a disadvantage because of our quarterback, then it's pretty clear that you probably should be looking for another quarterback option or refuse to pay that quarterback a boatload of money.
Yeah, well, this class as a whole is going to go up there with the 83 class, which had so many in 2004. I guess my one note would be, I think it's a little bit too early to put Love and even Herbert in the superstar category, because I think that's reserved for the top 4. that's semantics. Jalen Hurts is a funny guy to talk about too, because it felt like, especially Eagle fans want to drive him up, and he is a star quarterback to me. Last year, he was my MVP pick. Looking back now, maybe I have a bit of revisionist history on it. But the 3 reasons why to me were his total touchdowns, which the rushing touchdowns are an offensive line stat. If your feet aren't on the ground, it's mainly your teammates helping drive you, and you're kind of just cargo. Wins, when you've got the best team in football and the best coaching on a rookie contract, the question is, how does Jalen Hurts look when he's making $51 million a year? And he doesn't have Shane Steichen, and Jason Kelce now just retired, a first ballot Hall of Fame center, undoubtedly, and A.J. Brown's out. Any team that loses a top 5 wide receiver is going to take a big hit. But we saw he wasn't really solving any of the problems that Brian Johnson created. I think it's a lot more of a Brian Johnson problem. You laid that out perfectly. But yeah, I think it just comes down to Love being a more complete player with 2 less years of starting experience than Hurts. And I think he's got more of the tools to be a top 5 quarterback and a superstar in a year or two.
I understand you not wanting to prop up Jordan Love in that superstar tier just yet. Justin Herbert probably has to prove it in the playoffs first. That's totally understandable. Before we get into the NBA talk, because we're on this subject of Jordan Love, I do want to say that I think the Packers are upsetting the 49ers. And I think the Packers are going to the NFC Championship. And if they go to the NFC Championship, they can beat the Bucks, they can beat the Lions, and they have a chance to go to the Super Bowl. And if Jordan Love makes it in his first year starting, then we're going to have legitimate conversations about Jordan Love being a superstar quarterback. Now, here's why I think the Packers will beat the 49ers. The 49ers run a ton of zone coverage. They only run man coverage about 20% of the time. The Packers are number 1 in EPA per play against zone coverage, and both schemes are heavily reliant on their zone running scheme. They're not a gap running scheme. The Packers are 17th at defending zone runs. The 49ers are 31st in EPA per play defending zone runs. People don't talk about this enough with the 49ers defense, but they have weaknesses. They have fatal flaws. Defending zone runs is one of them. We saw 2 examples this season of teams that run a similar scheme to Green Bay that torched them and got their way offensively. The Cincinnati Bengals with Zach Taylor and the Minnesota Vikings with Kevin O'Connell. Both teams had massive offensive success. And with Green Bay, I think their offense is more potent than the Bengals were this year, than the Vikings were this year. In that game that the Niners faced Minnesota, Kirk Cousins did not have Justin Jefferson. They did not need a superstar wide receiver to have massive success offensively. And I think the Packers have the best offensive line. Right now, they're second in pass block win rate. Zach Tom and Rasheed Walker, one of the best tackle combinations. Their interior line with Elgton Jenkins and Josh Myers, they've been awesome. The Packers are an elite offensive line. They can run the hell out of the football. What they are great at, the 49ers struggle to defend. If the Packers jump off to an early lead, it plays right into the 49ers' biggest weakness, which is playing from behind. And despite the massive amounts of offensive success from the 49ers this year, they are a bottom 10 offense on late down. So we're talking about 3rd and 4th down. When you force the Niners into 3rd downs, they're a bottom 10 offense. The biggest reason why? Because their offensive line doesn't hold up, John. Trent Williams is the best offensive lineman on that group, but everybody else is beatable. And when you look at who the Packers have, Kenny Clark, Devontae White, Rashawn Gary, Lucas Van Ness, Preston Smith, they got guys on that defensive line that can get after it and that can get after Purdy. And if they can affect the game in that way and win in the trenches, which I believe they can, the Packers got a real legitimate shot. It's not an outside chance. Right now, Vegas, they're being way too disrespectful. I think the Niners are favored by almost 10 points.
9.5.
That's disrespect. That's disrespect. The Packers will not only cover this, but I think they have a legit shot at winning outright.
So, wow. They were definitely underdogs last week versus the Cowboys, but the underrated part of this Packers team is their play calling. Matt LaFleur is a disciple of the Shanahan tree, and he is one of the best play callers in football. The biggest liability for the Packers this year in the last 3 years has been Joe Barry, their defensive coordinator. But the last 3 weeks, they've held the Vikings to 10 points on New Year's, the Bears to 9 points. And then this last week, they're completely taking Dak out that game. I don't know if you've seen something specifically with their front, but seems like they're doing a better job getting the quarterback, stunting blitzes.
Mhm.
And with the caliber of their secondary, it is way better than the sum of its parts. It's been, to me, very underwhelming for their personnel. What is Joe Brady doing differently? Joe Barry, apologies, that's the Bills offense coordinator. Is Joe Brady doing anything differently? I just did again, Joe Barry, to where they can surprise Brock Purdy and throw him off to, as you point out before, get the lead early on, and then they can carry that with how well Aaron Jones is currently playing.
He is doing things differently. A couple weeks ago, after the Packers got torched by Bryce Young and Baker Mayfield, Matt LaFleur started taking control of defensive meetings. So ever since they faced the Vikings and the Bears and now the Cowboys, Matt LaFleur has been taking command of the defense and kind of been molding it to how he wants the team to play. And Packers players have came out and they've said that they're playing more free. And what I think that means is I think that they're just playing more man coverage. This is a stat that showcases just how talented the Packers defense and secondary is when they're allowed to just play I'm better than you football, which I think is man coverage, because man coverage is about sticking with your man. When they play zone, they're a bottom 10 defense in EPA per play. When the Packers play man, they're fourth in EPA per play, which means that when they play man, they are an elite passing defense.
Right.
They really disrupt the timing of offenses. And the 49ers this year, they've only seen man coverage 20% of the time, I think. Because teams often don't play man. They have too many weapons to play man, and the 49ers are first in EPA per play when they are faced with man coverage. But I don't think they face a secondary like this year. I think there have been very few, like the Browns, like the Ravens, and those teams had massive success. When I look at the 49ers, these are the toughest teams they've played, in my opinion. The Rams, the Cowboys, the Browns, the Bengals, the Vikings, and the Ravens. They're 2-4 in those games. Brock Purdy, 7 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. And Brock Purdy has thrown 14 touchdowns to 8 interceptions versus teams top 15 in defensive DVOA this year. Still solid. 14-8 is a solid number, but it's not quite the MVP caliber quarterback play that his stats indicate. And I don't know if I trust the Niners. I don't think they've been tested much this year. And I think in the games they have been tested, they haven't lived up to the billing. Versus the Ravens, they were tested and they fell apart. Versus the Vikings, they lost, even though they had some injuries. The Vikings had injuries too, and they lost. Versus the Bengals, Joe Burrow torched them, and that was an ass whooping. Versus the Browns, they lost. Versus the Rams in week 2, very close game, and they demolished and dominated the Dallas Cowboys, who we are now figuring out were more fraudulent than we thought. So really, I don't know if they've really been tested like that.
What this really feels like to me is a bit of the Joel Moran. He's coming around with this, and I kind of do agree with you. Brock Purdy, when he's faced well-designed, well-coached defenses like that Minnesota group, and the Niners have had injuries, and they have been able to play their way, their brand of football, it makes him a heavy drop-back passer. And in that type of matchup, I favor Jordan Love. These are 2 quarterbacks this year that have thrown 30 touchdowns and super productive, but I feel like in this moment on the road, Love just won in Dallas against Dan Quinn's defense. The 49ers losing to D'Amico Ryans is a very big, important note in this. There's something for San Francisco to prove, and we've seen injuries come at the worst possible times. I hope this is a hopefully healthy matchup, but it's something to keep an eye out on. There are some guys in the San Francisco team that are older. Some guys didn't practice this week, Dre Greenlaw and Clyde Farrell. I actually think they're going to cover the spread, but it's not a game I'm touching because this 49ers team still has something to CMC when they're up.
And this is the big difference. And The big difference is the quarterback. You mentioned how Jordan Love's playing at, you can argue the best, as like the best quarterback since week 11, 21 touchdowns and 1 interception. It's the command he has on the offense right now. He's a far better quarterback than Brock Purdy. It's not close. When you look at the 49ers on late downs, like I just mentioned, they don't have much success. They're 20th in EPA per play, 24th in success rate. Usually the offensive line does fall apart in those situations, and Brock Purdy can press up a little bit. The Packers on late downs are 6th in EPA per play and 5th in success rate, which I think just showcases quarterback play. When you have a great quarterback on third downs, when you're in third and long situations, that quarterback more often than not is going to make a positive play for you because he just has that type of talent. And you look at the Packers offensive numbers since week 11, I mean, they've been a top 2 offense. Jordan Love has been 2nd in EPA per play, 2nd in completion percentage over expectations, 2nd in air yards. And the Packers offense as a whole this year, they're 8th in EPA per play under center. And when using motion, they're 1st versus zone coverage, 3rd under pressure, and they're 19th versus man. But oftentimes and not, they won't see much man because of how much motion they use. And they don't have to worry about man coverage because they're facing a very zone heavy team in the 49ers. So when you look at all these stats, I think that the Packers match up very well against San Fran. And I want to say this last thing about Jordan Love. When you compare him to Aaron Rodgers, I think Aaron Rodgers was holding the Packers back in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. The receiver thing was made into a bigger issue than it truly was. He probably could have used a second receiver. I'm not saying he couldn't. Definitely. But in 2021, when the Packers lost to the Niners, the switch in that game, the reason why the Niners won was that special teams touchdown that put them up. It was a very low-scoring game. But Aaron Rodgers was missing a lot of throws. He wasn't making the proper reads. He wasn't targeting anybody outside of really Devontae. I thought he didn't play that well. And Jordan Love, not only can he make plays instinctually when things break down, but he will trust Matt LaFleur to put him in the right position to succeed. And that's something Aaron Rodgers didn't do. Matt LaFleur was probably very frustrated with Aaron that Aaron would change things up all the time. If Aaron didn't like something, he wouldn't run it. He didn't like motion. He didn't like under center stuff. He liked drop back, shotgun, West Coast, get the ball out quick. And there's kind of sometimes a limit to that. And now this offense is being fully unlocked because of Love's playmaking ability and because there's trust. The vibes are up with Green Bay. They're up. And I think this is going to be the upset of the weekend. People don't see it coming, but the Packers are going to win.
They're 0-4 for Rodgers, but these last 4 weeks, they're averaging 33 points with Aaron Jones. So 33 points against some of the best defenses in football in Chicago, Minnesota, and Dallas.
You put up this picture of me going door to door, getting Tua. So for the people that are not familiar, which, I mean, if you are watching this, you probably are listening to it. But the 201, I mean, that was one that we all kind of knew about that, right? I mean, there was some people sold on Tua, some people not. I was never really sold on Tua. He was always Jimmy Garoppolo, Jared Goff to me. And I think that's been revealing itself. Jalen Hurts was the one that I got called a hater for, John. Whenever I mentioned any weakness that he had, it was because I was hating and because I
felt that way.
I just didn't like the Eagles. That was but now people are starting to catch on to Jalen Hurts too, and he's getting criticized. The last story is Brock Purdy, someone that I got into heated debates with Riv about because I said, Brandon Ayuk is more valuable. I think on one of the last podcasts, I told Riv that the receiving core, Debo and Ayuk, are more valuable than Purdy, and he wasn't having it. He was saying Purdy's more valuable than those guys. And, people called me a hater for Brock Purdy too. And I think this is going to be the week where the better quarterback wins in Jordan Love. And we're sitting back and saying, man, Cam Newton might have been on to something. Cam Newton calling all these guys game managers, Tua, Dak, and Purdy, and getting eliminated. I mean, some redemption for Cam Newton, because there was a lot of disrespect on him as well when he gave his opinion on them.
Yeah, no, I mean, he wasn't totally wrong, but Jared Goff heard some of the noise and he played perfect under pressure.
That's why Jared Goff and Tua, two different tiers. Jared Goff has moved up. He's really matured as a quarterback. Tua got to show me he's not Samoan Jimmy G at this point, because it feels like he might be Samoan Jimmy G.
I'm making a video on this. I think Tua is the Julius Randle of the NFL, where his biggest strength is also his downfall in the playoffs. Randle's tough shot making, Tua's predetermined his reads, and also the fact he can't play in the cold or evolve.
Let's transition to NBA. Pascal Siakam to the Pacers. Do you like it? Do you not like it?
I don't like it. From a fit perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Playing transition off the ball, Pascal's going to become a more efficient three-point shooter, and it's a great ecosystem in Indiana. But I look at the Pacers and how competitive they've been this year, above 500 versus good teams. Tyrese Halliburton playing on All-NBA level. They're playing so well, it's very easy to get caught up in let's try to win right now. But the focus for them should be the long game and not trying to expedite their timeline by acquiring a 29-year-old here. Pascal is 7 years older than a lot of their core players. And Indiana does not want to give up guys like Bannock Mathurin and Jarris Walker specifically. They haven't seen anything, and it's too early to move off of them. I believe with Indiana, their goal should be acquiring more smaller pieces like a Jonathan Kuminga, who is 22, fits the timeline, and you won't have to break the bank for. With Siakam, you're going to have to give him a max extension, and it's going to put you in that same timeline as teams as the Celtics, the Knicks, the Heat, who are trying to win right now. But if I'm the Pacers, I think patience is the right way to approach it.
Okay, so you're under the assumption they have to give up one of Jarris or Mathurin.
If they don't, they're going to have to give up 3 first-round picks or 2.
Okay, so the deal that I read from The Athletic when this report was dropped by Shams, 3 firsts, Bruce Brown, a salary filler, which I think is most likely TJ McConnell, and that's the deal right there. I like it. I really do, John. I think you're being a little bit too hard on the Pacers for this. I don't think it messes up their timeline all that much. But you can't trade first-round picks in consecutive years anyway. So, they're trading 3 first-round picks, but every other year they'll have a first-round pick at their disposal to keep adding on to their current team. But I look at a starting lineup of Tyrese, Buddy, Nesmith, Pascal, and Miles Turner, and I think this team becomes much, much better. You're adding in a proven all-star who can drive to the basket, who can facilitate. He can play defense. And even he is not the most consistent from 3. Above the break, he's awful. He's shooting below 30%. But in this offense, when he's playing off ball, if you place him in the corner, that's one of his strengths. He's actually shooting great from the corner this year. He's shooting 50% from the right corner on 18 attempts and 41.7% from the left corner on 24 attempts. So he's a great corner 3-point shooter, and I think that's going to be a shot in this offense. I think first-round picks are overvalued. I mean, Jarris Walker right now is not playing. If you can still keep your young core of Tyrese, Mathurin, and have Jarris Walker develop, I really don't think that the Pacers are losing all that much. 3 first-round picks does sound like a lot, but you have to think about what are those first-round picks going to turn into when Tyrese Halliburton is 25, 26 years old. You're going to draft a player with pick number 19 that's going to produce from day one. And now you just extend that. So when he's 27, you're drafting a guy in the 20s and you think he's just going to help out the team. I think they need to add a real injection of talent, because the Indiana Pacers goal right now shouldn't just be making the playoffs. It should be making it out the first round. And right now with their current team, I don't think they can make it out the first round if they don't add another all-star to the team.
I agree. In a vacuum on the court, Pascal would be the best player he's ever been, I think, because the amount of open threes Pascal generate for a guy that shot 47, 34, let me double check, and 48% from the corner the last 3 years. It's going to be like 2019 all over again. The amount of open looks, the less pressure on him, the rim protector, Miles Turner, and the spacing as well. And you do make a great point. because while I would not make this trade personally. Bruce Brown's an expiring. He's 26 years old, and those 3 first-round picks are not going to be lottery picks. And if they are, they're going to be somewhere in the back end of that 10 to 14 range. So to me, it really just comes down to the age. If Pascal were 3 years younger and fit perfectly, he is 29 years old, going on 30, maybe 28, about to turn 29. But I believe defensively, they need more of a stalwart, someone that kind of like an OG Anunoby could really upgrade them on the side of the floor where they're a bottom 3 unit. And Siakam in the past has showcased to be a very valuable team defender, but I don't view him as that problem solver that they desperately need at the point of attack, gain around screens, switching. Pascal can do. I think more than anything for Indiana, what's going to get them past the first round is finding a defensive foundation. And with Miles Turner, it's been nowhere to be found. He's a good, above average defensive player. With Siakam, I feel like it wouldn't really make much of a difference on that side of the floor.
I can understand your reasoning. How about the Bruce Brown contract, man? Because in the offseason, everybody labeled it as an overpay. But when you're a small market, I mean, these contracts matter if you want to get any trades done. Mm-hmm. And the only reason they'll be able to trade for Siakam is because they overpaid Bruce Brown.
Right.
But that kind of ties into the other point about making this trade, is that the Pacers are not going to find a player better. They're not. I mean, are they going to sign one in free agency? Are they going to outbid teams to try to get an all-star player? You're talking about someone in Siakam who is on an expiring, so teams are not willing to throw a lot of assets at him, and that makes the Pacers the perfect team to trade for him, and it puts them in an advantageous position. You mentioned Jonathan Kuminga going to the Pacers, and I think he's been playing really well on Golden State as of recently, but I don't know if there's anybody on Indiana that Golden State would want in return for Kuminga unless it's Miles Turner. And I don't think you do that if you're the Pacers.
I agree. Maybe they would want Bruce Brown and Aaron Nesmith together. But Nesmith is shooting the cover off the ball. He's been their best defender. He's 24. I think Nesmith's kind of cemented himself as one of their 4 or 5 best players and someone they should keep. Huge underrated piece in that Malcolm Brogdon trade because he is finding the confidence he never had in Boston. But to me, like, Indiana has the highest points per game in the NBA, number 1, highest offensive efficiency. Siakam will make them a better offense and a better team. But I do look around the NBA and I see other guys who can be available for a similar price. Would you rather have Lauri Markkanen for 3 first-round picks and a guy like Bennedict Mathurin? Or would you rather go for Brandon Ingram? Zion, I'm not quite interested in because of his body and just like the long-term sustainability of his play style. And then I look beyond those 2 guys. I think of Mikal Bridges maybe. And Mikal is a worse player than Pascal, but he may fit more of what they could use. The only issue with that, of course, would be, unfortunately, Brooklyn does not want to trade him. So I think of players like that who fit more of a two-way, highly valuable defensive players archetype.
It's hard with those players. Outside of Lauri Markkanen, I think Lauri Markkanen is legit. Mikal Bridges has regressed this year in Brooklyn. He's not the same defender he was, and offensively, he struggles to create his own shot. I fear that Mikal Bridges going to another situation where he is not a focal point of the offense. He will revert back to role player sons Mikal Bridges, which like is a fine player, but it's not an all-star. And I think you need an all-star to actually be legitimate in the East.
I mean, Mikal made that Suns team a top 10 defense when they didn't have amazing personnel in the backcourt or with DeAndre Ayton at center. He was the linchpin of a great defense. Could he do that again, Indiana, while being an awesome play finisher and really good transition player, averaging 17 points? Kind of similar to what OG Anunoby is for the Knicks. I think that still allows you that patience because I think he got the first round at that.
And then Brandon Ingram, I'm just not a big fan of Brandon Ingram. I think he's a solid player, but he's kind of, to me, in that Zach LaVine mold where, you know, he's putting up good stats on a team that sometimes is competitive, sometimes is not. I love his shot creation ability, but as a defender, what is he really offering you? So for me, I don't like the Brandon Ingram one, and I do think out of all the names you mentioned, I mean, you have to go back to asking price. And the asking price for Siakam, because of the expiring that he's on, is much lesser than those other players at this current moment. The Nets seem unwilling to move on from Mikal Brandon Ingram and the Pelicans are winning, so they're not going to take any offer that doesn't make them much
Right.
better right now.
That's true.
And the Jazz are winning with Laurie right now, and they're probably thinking of keeping him as a cornerstone. But even then, I don't think that the Pacers can outbid OKC for someone like Laurie.
Right.
And I don't think OKC would target someone like Pascal because it doesn't fit their style. So to me, the Pacers are the best fit. The only other team are the Mavericks that could enter the sweepstakes. And I would love to see Pascal in Dallas. I think that actually puts the Dallas Mavericks in true title contention. But I don't know how willing the Mavericks are to just go all in and get him.
I think they're willing. Siakam, his best fit might just be in Indiana. But to me, I think so much of building a contender is picking the right timeline. When the Jazz acquired Mike Conley, it was a great move by the second season, but Conley was 33 years old, and they had kind of expedited that runway. With Siakam, he's 30. I'm not quite sure with how much energy he puts on a driving on the offensive end, if that play style is going to be conducive to an all-star appearance in 3 years.
Isn't the timeline aspect kind of overrated? Because Gobert didn't fit the Timberwolves timeline, and now they're the first seed in the Western Conference.
Yeah, but we haven't seen them in the playoffs. With the Jazz,
I think they'll be fine in the playoffs.
And then we saw them crumple in the second round. I don't know. I think the Timberwolves are a contender, but they're not a tier A contender to me. So we got to see it in May, and then we can come to a decision on that.
Listen, this thing you have against the Timberwolves.
Not a thing. I think there are teams in the Western Conference that I kind of think have a higher ceiling and a more reasonable.
Yeah, plural.
Teams. Yes, not singular.
Denver.
Yeah.
OKC.
Yes.
The Clippers.
Clippers, I think, is same exact tier as Minnesota. Contender.
You don't think the Clippers are on the same tier as OKC?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't trust this team in the playoffs.
Why? Because of injuries or because of how they're playing?
If I were OG, I would say it's kind of like the girl you keep going back to. It's been year 5 of this. I don't trust Kawhi to stay healthy. I really need to see their bench come together. I think Norman Powell is a bit redundant with their core group of guys. And I'm not putting my money on James Harden as a number 3 with less touches in the postseason where he has disappeared in the past. There are many different layers of this Clippers team, but I think beyond the narratives, I do wonder how sustainable their defense is too. Specifically, Zubac's out the lineup. So I would have the Clippers as a contender and a top 4 team in the Western Conference, above the Suns, above the Warriors. But I'm not putting them in the same tier as Denver.
Victor Wembanyama in the last 8 games is averaging 24 points per game, 9.4 rebounds, 3.6 blocks in 24 minutes. I want to talk about just the growth in his game. He's playing center more, and that's really led to this explosion of production that he's on currently. And he's just being used more correctly. It's less isolation, less post-ups, and more cutting and more rim running. And I think that's what he's best at. I don't know about you, but Victor Wembanyama is already showing that he is probably closer to an all-NBA player than he is just your normal average rookie. I mean, the way he's playing right now, he's playing some elite level basketball, and he's another breed of these centers and big men players that they hate playing center for whatever reason, but they are the most productive when they play it.
That's definitely true. But I think a big part of it also just been Greg Popovich wanting to plug him in with Zach Collins early on. To touch on the center point, I think for as good as Wemby can be offensively, it's really the defense. Opponents this year have had a pretty tough time finishing on him. And it's kind of Gobert light, where that presence is such a big void for that Spurs defense. The numbers don't really quite back it up. When you watch him play, it's got that same fear factor, and it can continue to improve when he's not 19 years old. Now, I think the biggest element for the Spurs is that now that Wemby is playing center more traditionally, that's kind of where he's meant to play in a closing lineup, let's say. They do need a point guard, right? Jeremy Shohan to Trae Jones is really a Band-Aid and a poor Band-Aid. I look at the Atlanta Hawks, the team that most recently played, and DeJounte Murray has been rumored to go to San Antonio. But to me, they really need a playmaker who can run pick and roll with Wemby and hit him consistently. And when looking around the NBA, there are really only one singular better pick and roll operators than Trae Young. He would be such a perfect fit for the San Antonio team. And he is somebody that's entering the trade cycle slowly as Atlanta is struggling to get to the 500 mark in a very deep Eastern Conference. What do you think about Trae Young and Victor Wembanyama together? Would you give up 4 first-round picks if you're the Spurs and maybe a young player for what I believe is a top 5 offensive engine easily in NBA?
I'll give a 5. I would give up. It doesn't matter how many first round picks I got to give. I think Trae Young is stuck in a rock and a hard place because he is never going to be the best player on a championship team. I think he's just too small to be one. But if he can play second fiddle to Victor Wembanyama or an actual elite talent that's a top 5 player in the NBA, I think of like an Anthony Davis and Trae Young pairing would probably be perfect as well. Then now Trae Young can win at the level that he wants to win at. I think DeJounte Murray is going too low for the Spurs. You're not shooting high enough.
Exactly.
If you're going to trade a lot for somebody, you got to trade a lot for somebody that's going to move the needle. And I think there's this weird place that Atlanta's stuck in right now that they have an all-star in Trae Young, a hypothetical all-star in DeJounte Murray, and a lot of good role players, but they're not able to win games because you go along the roster of Atlanta Hawks and just breaking it down. You can't tell me that Clint Capella can't start on 70% of NBA teams right now. Clint Capella is one of the better centers at what he does right now. Jalen Johnson
is awesome.
You can't tell me that there are not every single NBA team wouldn't want him to contribute on their basketball team right now. DeAndre Hunter, same thing. DeAndre Hunter would have a rotation role on every single team. Bogdan Bogdanovic, the same thing goes for him. So we're talking about a Hawks team that has Trae, DeJounte, DeAndre Hunter, Jalen Johnson, Clint Capella, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Onyeka Okongwu is another one who'd have a rotation role on any team in the NBA. Like this is not a bad roster, which is why it's kind of been weird to me how much they've been losing, because I think they should be much better. Is it coaching? Is it just the way these players fit together? I'm not exactly sure, but it feels like just one big underachieving mess. And there isn't much room to go up in the Trae Young era and retool to really build around him in Atlanta.
And it's easy to see why Hawk fans looking back were so disappointed in 2021. They came so close to the finals because that was their gateway. That was the ticket. That was the year. Since then, the East has gotten a lot better. And you did shower some praise on Clint Capella. He's a great rebounder, but all of those guys are average, not named Jalen Johnson and Bogdan Bogdanovic. Bogdan, to me, is a clear 6 man of the year favorite, top of the list. And Jalen is basically the Aaron Gordon mold, shooting 40% from 3-point range. Really good passer, really good defensive player. At the end of the day, the Hawks are not a good team because their defense is horrible, and they've invested a ton into that defense. And there's no, as you point out, needle mover on that side of the ball. Victor Wembanyama is the ultimate needle mover defensively. And you made a great point. Anthony Davis is like the perfect example of a one-man defense. Trae is a one-man offense. I'm pretty confident Victor Wembanyama, like Rudy Gobert, like an Anthony Davis, could get to that one-man defense level. It's not showing now. The Spurs rank 24th in defensive rating and 26th in opponents' points per game. But if you surround him with 1 point of attack defender, in a year you could see that shoot up to 12th in the NBA. And their offense currently ranks 28th in San Antonio. They don't have the one-man wrecking crew that can drop 40 points, Trae shooting better, and at the same exact time is going to get everybody open looks. The reason why all these guys in the Hawks are shooting well is because of Trae's gravity. And I think that goes without being said anywhere he plays.
What would the package look like for Trae Young if he were to go to the Spurs?
Okay, let me pull up the Spurs payroll real quick.
Because I have some off the top of my head. I think Vassell has to go.
Oh, I don't know.
You're not getting Trae Young without Devin Vassell.
Keldon Johnson.
Keldon Johnson is a negative asset.
But it's a contract that's front loaded, so he's gonna make $17 million at the end of it at 28.
But still, I understand maybe probably the Hawks are gonna go into a rebuild, so maybe it makes sense. I really don't think the Hawks trade Trae Young if they don't get at least 2 or 3 impact players. Like I think the Spurs would have to trade Vassell Keldon Johnson, and somebody else. Like they would have to trade the 2 top guys not named Wemby plus the picks.
I would probably say if you're giving them 4 to 5 first rounders, let's say 4 first rounders and 3 swaps. Jeremy Shohan, who showcased potential, could use a change of scenery to develop, and then Keldon. To make salary work, you put in Doug McDermott, and you keep Vassell. I think he's perfect in a third role as like a Chris Middleton. Could be better defensively, but on the offensive end, he would be key to that team.
I agree with that. If the Spurs were to trade their best players outside of Wemby for Trae, let's just say it's Vassell and Keldon Johnson. I mean, the Spurs now have Trae Young and Wemby, and then they have like Doug McDermott starting with whoever else. I mean, the roster just like Malachi Branham. It's gonna be Trae Young, Malachi Branham, and Doug McDermott, and like Sohan with Wemby or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would not have a team ready to compete in the Western Conference. So if you're making this move, Vassell's had a quieter year. Remember last year, only played 30 games due to his knee injury. But long-term, his play style is more conducive as a third option. And at the end of the day, the Spurs need to get an elite point guard in this Western Conference. You've got Luka, Shea. The Nuggets have their own unique engine. Victor Wembanyama is a great defensive player, and I think he's a fantastic play finisher. I don't quite think he is a lead initiator because at that size, it's more of the highlight plays you're going to see, but not as much the separation and playmaking gravitas as a complementary piece like an Anthony Davis. And maybe that's the thing here. Maybe this is Anthony Davis, New Orleans all over again, where you have the #1 overall pick. He is one of the best draft prospects we've seen, but he needs to have a star that's durable. Drew Holiday wasn't in those years. Trae Young would be, and a star who raises the team's floor dramatically.
I agree. Before we get out of here, I just want to ask you one last question. Am I hating or am I saying the truth when I say there's just no possible way the Lakers get into contention regardless of what move they make?
They've run out of assets, so yes, you're not hating, and it is very reasonable to say that.
The leading candidate is DeJounte Murray to go there, and Lakers fans are throwing parades because they might get DeJounte and Clint Capella.
God bless y'all.
They will have a rude awakening. And actually, this is the last one, John. Are you still on the Suns, or are you totally giving up? Or are you waiting to see 10 more games from the Suns' big three and be impatient with them?
I'm not worried. I am aware that they're currently the 8th seed, and last night they had a big win versus the Kings. They choked that rough fourth quarter. I am not out on the Suns, and to think you would be out when you haven't seen this trio play 10 games together is crazy. If you're going to judge them when they're not together, I think you're scared of the potential of that team, and yeah, you should not be out so soon.
I think they're very scary, and the depth is not an issue. If you have KD, Beal, and Booker with Grayson, Eric Gordon, and Nurkic, that's a pretty good rotation. You add 1 or 2 guys on there, I think they'll be fine. I think they'll be more than fine, and I think they'll finish as the top 6 seed in the Western Conference for sure.
That's overblown. We saw the Nuggets win a championship with 6 rotation players.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Joel Moran Show. Make sure you guys are subscribing to the channel. Make sure you guys are rating or reviewing the podcast. Make sure to follow John on Twitter. John, give him your Twitter handle.
John_Tortorella.
And make sure to follow me too at Joel V. Moran. And we'll see you guys next time.